I accidentally insulted a stranger, who turned out to be my boss. It was a typical Monday morning when I first met John, my new boss. I had just joined the company and was trying to make a good first impression. I was eager to prove myself, but admittedly, I was a bit nervous. John, on the other hand, was everything I wasn't. Confident, polished, and authoritative. He carried himself with an air of someone who had been in the business for a long time, and honestly, I was a little intimidated by him. One day, a few weeks into my job, I found myself in the break room, grabbing a coffee. John was there too, having a brief chat with another colleague. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to strike up a conversation, show him I was approachable, and maybe even make him see me as a potential asset. As I poured my coffee, I overheard John saying something about how he was going to focus more on team development and communication. I took a deep breath and decided to chime in. "Yeah, team dynamics can really make or break a project, don't you think?" I said, trying to sound casual. John looked up, giving me a polite but distant smile. "Absolutely, communication is key." I nodded eagerly, trying to build on his response. "Yeah, especially in a team that's, well, not exactly getting along." I laughed awkwardly, referring to the tensions I'd noticed in the office. But that's when I made my first mistake. I went on to share my opinion about some issues I'd observed. I thought I was being helpful, pointing out ways the team could improve, but John's smile faded as I spoke. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had just insulted him. The way he looked at me, like I'd crossed some unspoken line, made my stomach drop. "I'll take that into consideration," he said curtly, before walking off, leaving me standing there, embarrassed. I had tried to impress him, and instead, I had done the exact opposite. That moment haunted me for the rest of the day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had said something wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. Little did I know, this awkward encounter would have consequences far beyond my imagination. The next few days after my awkward encounter with John were incredibly tense. Every time I saw him, I tried to act normal, but his demeanor seemed off. He was always polite, but distant, and I couldn't help but wonder if my comments had affected how he saw me. It was almost as if I had made a mark in his mind that I couldn't erase. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had no idea how to fix the situation. I knew I had to do something to make it right, but what? How could I apologize for something I didn't even realize was wrong at the time? The tension came to a head a week later, when John scheduled a meeting to discuss upcoming projects. I thought it was going to be another standard team meeting. I was wrong. But something unexpected happened that made me realize I was overthinking the whole thing. It was during a team meeting when John casually referenced the conversation we'd had about my mistake. At first, my heart sank, thinking he might be about to call me out in front of everyone, but instead, he used it as a teaching moment. "Sometimes, it's easy to make assumptions or forget to look beyond the surface," John said, smiling at me briefly. "But we all have to learn to correct ourselves and move forward. It's how we grow." He wasn't just referring to me. It was clear that he was addressing the entire team. But I couldn't help but feel like his words were meant for me. A gentle reminder that mistakes are part of life, and it's how we handle them that truly matters. That day, I left the office feeling a strange sense of clarity. I had learned something not just about myself, but about human interactions. In a fast-paced world, where we rush to judgment or assume the worst about others, John's approach was a breath of fresh air. He didn't hold on to negativity. He didn't let the mistake define me. Instead, he used it to foster growth and understanding. It wasn't just about fixing one mistake. It was about how we approach life's challenges. I realized that I had been so worried about losing respect in John's eyes, but in reality, he respected me more for owning up to my actions. It was a humbling moment, one that gave me a fresh perspective on handling tough situations. Weeks later, I found myself in a situation where I had to apologize again, this time to a different colleague. It wasn't the same kind of mistake, but it was a mistake nonetheless, and this time, I approached it with the same mindset John had modeled for me. I owned my mistake, took responsibility, and apologized sincerely. And just like before, the colleague responded with grace. It made me realize that, in a way, we're all just trying to navigate life without making too many mistakes. We all slip up from time to time, but it's how we rise from those moments that truly defines us. Looking back at the day I insulted John, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the experience. It had been uncomfortable, yes, but it was also transformative. I had learned the power of humility, the value of taking ownership, and the importance of understanding others. Sometimes, our biggest blunders turn out to be our greatest lessons. I was no longer scared of making mistakes. I embraced them as opportunities to grow. John looked up, his eyes narrowing for a second before he smiled. Of course, come on in. What's on your mind? I stepped into his office, feeling the weight of my words press on me like a ton of bricks. For a moment, I stood there, hesitating, but I knew I couldn't put this off any longer. I needed to come clean. I stuttered, trying to find the right words. I owe you an apology, and I know this is probably going to sound strange, but I need to say it. John raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt, waiting for me to continue. I didn't know who you were, I said, my voice shaking. And I said some things that I shouldn't have said. It was rude, and I honestly didn't mean it like that. I never intended to disrespect you, but I did, and I'm really sorry. For a moment, there was silence. I couldn't read his expression, and that made me even more nervous. But then, to my surprise, John leaned back in his chair and let out a soft chuckle. It's okay, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. I figured something like this might happen. I blinked, confused. You knew? John nodded. Yeah, I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's testing their limits or just not aware of the full picture. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't holding a grudge. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to prove myself. I had to show him that I wasn't the careless, disrespectful person I'd acted like. I really appreciate your understanding, John. I just want you to know that I respect you and the work you do. I won't make that mistake again, I promised. John smiled again, the tension in the room easing. I know you won't. Just remember, sometimes it's good to be a little more aware of who you're talking to before you speak. But don't worry, it happens. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It seemed like I was going to make it out of this after all. And maybe, just maybe, John and I could move past this awkward start. But as I turned to leave, John added one last thing. One more thing? He said. Just make sure you don't make any more assumptions about people, all right? You never know who might be listening. I nodded, silently thanking him for his grace in handling the situation. As I walked out of his office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, mixed with the embarrassment of the earlier conversation. At least the worst was over, or so I thought. The next few days at work felt like they were happening in slow motion. It was strange, knowing that I had been so close to a disaster, and that somehow I had avoided the worst of it. John and I had resumed our usual interactions, and while things felt a bit more formal than before, I could tell that he wasn't holding a grudge. His reaction had been more than I'd hoped for, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I still needed to prove myself. That's when it hit me. I'd made a huge mistake. The John I had been dealing with wasn't just a manager, he was my boss, the very person in charge of our department, the leader I had to report to. And to make things worse, it hit me like a ton of bricks. His title wasn't just something on his name tag, it meant power, responsibility, and respect. I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. In my mind, I had thought of him as a colleague, someone I could chat with in the break room, or joke around with. But here I was, realizing I'd insulted someone with far more authority than I had ever understood. Suddenly, every moment I had spent with John over the past few days felt all wrong. The casual conversations in the break room, the way I'd been sarcastic about some things, all of it had been completely inappropriate. I hadn't just offended a colleague, I had disrespected my boss in a way I couldn't take back. I had no idea how to fix this. It felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. I felt like I had been walking on thin ice, not realizing how thin it really was. But now, there was no way to ignore the truth. As my heart pounded, I tried to think about what I could do to salvage the situation. I had no real excuse for my behavior, no reason to justify being careless with my words. But if I wanted to keep my job, I needed to own up to what I'd done. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at my phone screen, the weight of the reality setting in. I couldn't hide anymore. It was time to face John. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on work at all. I kept replaying the moment in my head when I had casually insulted John, not knowing who he was. Every time I thought about it, the embarrassment grew. I had always considered myself a decent person, and I prided myself on being respectful. But this was a mistake that felt impossible to undo. As soon as the clock hit 5 p.m., I packed my things, trying to act normal, despite the anxiety bubbling inside me. My heart was racing as I walked to the elevator. Was John still at the office? What was I going to say? I hadn't planned for this. Who plans for a mistake like this? I took a deep breath and pushed open the office door. The office was quieter than usual, with most of the team already gone. I could hear the hum of computers and the soft sound of footsteps echoing from the hallway. My palms were clammy, and I could feel my stomach twisting into knots. This was it. I needed to talk to him. I made my way toward his office, nervously smoothing my shirt. I knocked once before pushing the door open. John was sitting at his desk, looking over some papers, completely unaware of the internal panic I was experiencing. "Hey, John, do you have a minute?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me. We gathered in the conference room, and as usual, John took his place at the head of the table. He began going over the agenda, and I tried to focus on the discussion. However, something about the way he was speaking made me uneasy. He was addressing the team with authority, but it felt different, more controlled, less approachable than usual. I couldn't shake the feeling that the tension between us had reached a breaking point. Then, as the meeting progressed, John made a point to single me out. "I'd like to hear your thoughts on the team dynamics, actually," he said, looking directly at me. My heart raced. I froze. I knew this was my chance to redeem myself, but I couldn't help but feel like a deer caught in headlights. I was already thinking about the conversation we had in the break room and how I'd managed to offend him. Should I apologize? Should I explain that I didn't mean it that way? My thoughts were a jumbled mess. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke up, offering a half-hearted comment about improving communication. It wasn't my best work. It wasn't even close to my best work. I felt awkward and self-conscious, like everything I said was going to be scrutinized. And as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized just how much I was overthinking it all. John didn't respond in the way I had hoped. Instead of acknowledging my input, he quickly moved on to the next topic, leaving me feeling like I'd just been dismissed. My stomach sank. It wasn't just about what I said anymore. It was about the invisible barrier between us that seemed impossible to break. The uncomfortable silence that followed was enough to make me want to crawl into a hole and disappear. But the real bombshell dropped later that day, when I finally learned the truth. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on some work, when I got a notification on my phone. It was a message from Sarah, one of my colleagues. She had sent a link to an article about a corporate event happening next month. I clicked it, trying to get back into the rhythm of the workday. But then, as I scrolled down the article, something caught my eye. A familiar name. John Matthews, to be featured in the upcoming leadership panel. Wait, John Matthews? I blinked at the screen, confused. I knew John was a good manager, but I didn't realize that he was so high up. It seemed like I was missing something important here. The article continued with details about John's accomplishments, including his rise through the company and his role in shaping its direction. But something stood out to me. The piece mentioned that John Matthews had been with the company for over a decade, working his way from a junior role all the way to leadership.